Hi. You're early. I haven't even said hello yet. Hello and welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records in alphabetical order, like a big nerd, and talk about why I love them. We have finished with the letter G, and today we will be moving on to the letter H. Hair. The album, the song, the beauty, the smother, the wonder of the good stuff that adorns our otherwise naked noggins. The story of today's song very much intersects with my own, so I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today and sharing some of my story with you. I hope you like it. Let's begin. This is me as a very little kid. I went to daycare. I had a rich and multi-layered narrative for every single one of my stuffed animals. I loved playing pirates with my grandmother, and every Sunday night I was forced to endure a terrible ordeal. I would be placed in a chair where I would sit for literally hours while my long-suffering mother, armed with a comb, set about trying to disentangle my unruly hair. I hated this weekly ritual, and because of that, I resented my hair. I'd watch those shampoo commercials with these beautiful models with their shining tresses, but there were no herbal essences ads with people who looked like me. And while the VO5 ad did have an incredibly catchy jingle,
Alberto VO5 Ultra Shampoos and Conditioners with Hydratine.
not a single one, certainly that aired in New Zealand, featured a person with like properly curly hair. And by that I mean seriously curly, not implying that there is a right way to have curly hair and a wrong way to have curly hair. Anyway, hell, there was no one in my family who had hair like mine. My mum had much tighter curls, which she straightened, and my dad had shorter, less curly hair that was, in any case, rapidly disappearing. My sister hadn't yet been born. I had no friends with hair like that. There were no media personalities that I was aware of with hair like mine. So I couldn't appreciate it as anything other than an unwelcome point of distinction. Let's fast forward. This is me at 14 years old. And also my little sister, who was featured on this channel in the past. It was extremely unusual for me to wear my hair like this, but I was cajoled into it because we were taking family photos. I normally kept it bound in a braid or in a ponytail, where it would cause me as little trouble as possible. Looking back on this picture, I realized that this was sort of the moment in my life where I began to self-actualize. I'd recently rediscovered the Beatles and fallen head over heels for the second time. I'd started writing my own music, and it all just sort of poured out of me at once. I was really enjoying listening to music that I loved and working out arrangements on piano, and obviously that was helping me develop into the musician that I was going to become. I was also obsessed with the 1960s. I had this t-shirt that I'd bought at a Greyhound bus station that was just a collage of images from 1960 to 1969, and I wore that shirt to rags. So yeah, it was a period of my life where my sense of humor, my sense of music, my sense of style were beginning to develop, although if that t-shirt is anything to go by, perhaps not so much style. And then right in the thick of that, I walked into the local video store one day, and I happened upon a life-altering DVD. That DVD was the 1979 film adaptation of the Hair stage play. It was directed by Milos Forman, and he filmed it in between One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus, so, you know, reputable director. It was a movie that was nominated for 2 Golden Globes. The New York Times put it on the 1,000 best movies ever list. Siskel and Ebert named it as one of their favorite films of 1979, and Siskel actually named it his #1 film for that year. When that video rental store inevitably met its demise, as did pretty much every other one that ever existed, I ended up buying the DVD for about $2, and it brought me endless joy. I'd previously been obsessed with the Woodstock DVD that the video rental place had. I was checking it out at least once a month. Honestly, it would have cost less to just buy the damn thing. I got something new out of it every time I watched it. I absolutely adored that documentary. But I will say that of the 32 acts who played at Woodstock, by my count, only 7 of them had acts that were fronted by a person of color, and only 5 of them had acts that were fronted by women. And even that, I think, for 1969 is a fairly high representation of people from marginalized groups. Hair, on the other hand, opens like this. Look at her hair. It was everything that I loved conceptually about the hippie movement, but with so much more representation. And just very quickly, the film version is totally different from the stage version, to the point that the original playwrights of Hair, a tribal love rock musical or whatever it's called, they disavowed the film. They said that, as far as they were concerned, there was no film adaptation of their musical. Although the characters had the same names and some of the songs overlapped, it was not the same animal. This week I watched a charmingly mediocre stage production on YouTube, and I can confirm it is very different. There is no way in hell that the stage production would have translated well to the screen. So the movie has a much more clear and intentional narrative. But here's the main difference. The first of the stage productions took place in late 1967, so right after the Summer of Love and a couple of years before Woodstock. It was also sort of semi-autobiographical. The playwrights were basing the characters on themselves. So you're right in the thick of it. For what it's worth, John Fogerty of Creedence Clearwater Revival called the stage show a totally watered-down version of what was actually happening, and so he couldn't get behind it. And John Lennon reportedly called it dull. On the other hand, shooting for the film began 10 years after the Summer of Love and was released 10 years after Woodstock. In those 10 years, the US pulled out of Vietnam, and there had been major shifts in society, in part as a result of the Black liberation movement, the gay liberation movement, and the women's liberation movement, which had been influenced by the hippie movement. So the movie has the benefit of hindsight, which means that its critiques of the 60s are a little bit more nuanced. It digs deeper and more explicitly into issues like class and poverty.
Ain't got no home, ain't got no shoes, ain't got no money, ain't got no class.
Gender politics.
Well, all I'm talking about is Lafayette Jr. here is your child.
How can people be so heartless?
Queerness.
White boys give me goosebumps. White boys give me chills.
Race politics.
I'm black, I'm black. I'm pink, I'm pink. I'm red, so white.
The draft.
Not more than 5 years. Or both.
And the music feels like a modernization of those ideas as well. As the music is what we are here to fangirl about, let's do that. This is one of the first records I ever bought, and it cost me about $2. The first and most obvious point of difference with this soundtrack as opposed to the stage show is that the stage show was a rock soundtrack.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
And this is very much a funk soundtrack. They put some stank on this groove.
When the mood is in the seventh house.
What is funk? What is hip? Let's do a very cursory primer. Funk originated in African American communities in the mid-1960s when bebop and blues R&B and
I hear you knocking, but you can't come in.
Afro-Cuban rhythms cross-pollinated in New Orleans. This new sound was picked up by one James Brown, godfather of soul, who began to develop the music with this new emphasis on the downbeat as opposed to the 2 and 4. So if you listen to a song like I Feel Good,
I feel good.
for every 4 beats, there's an emphasis on the first beat. 1, 2, I feel good. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. I knew that I would. As opposed to something like Same Old Song by the Four Tops, where there's a much clearer emphasis on beats 2 and 4. It's the same 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So funk has this very driving, lurching, danceable beat. And then groups like Sly and the Family Stone and Parliament Funkadelic took up the torch, developed the genre further. It's a music that has a strong emphasis on the rhythm section, on these complex polyrhythmic parts and interplay between bass and percussion. Often the players were aggressively skilled. It's a genre that not only gave a voice to African American communities, but also which made space for the women of those communities to innovate. People like Chaka Khan. So in that respect, this original soundtrack is less Jefferson Airplane and more Betty Davis. Now, if you've never heard of Betty Davis, I encourage you to pause the video and check her out because she is a trip. And because of this, I think that the choice to make this soundtrack funk rather than rock is the perfect one, because this is a film that explores more deeply the ideas of societal marginalization in its many forms. The soundtrack rhythm section features 2 musicians who previously had worked with James Brown, and this information was incredibly difficult to track down because it's not in the liner notes. As far as I can tell from my internet sleuthing, the bassist is Wilbur Bascombe, and the drummer is Bernard Purdie. Who was one of the most incredible session musicians in the biz at the time. When he was recording this, it was about the same time that he was doing drums for Steely Dan's Asia. But he'd also played with Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, Aretha Franklin,
Nina Simone, Roberta Flack, Donny Hathaway, Ray Charles, Frank Sinatra,
Cat Stevens, Hall & Oates, Joe Cocker. So this guy got around. And the 2 of them, as I mentioned earlier, were aggressively skilled. Because of those 2, this soundtrack goes hard. And we're gonna listen to the title track. It opens with a slow, sedate intro sung by Donnie Dacus, later of Chicago. This goes on a bit before the rhythm section kicks down the door. Ah! Isn't that amazing? You can really hear the skill in those players in the rhythm section. They're both playing these very quick, detailed parts. Give me down to there, hair, shoulder length longer. Do you hear that? Do you hear that interplay between the 2 mainstays of that rhythm section? Driving the song along, it's hectic, it's frenetic, it's incredible. Bass correspondent, can you play us that bass line? Are you kidding me? You want me to play Wilbur Bascombe's part on the bass from the Hair soundtrack. I'll give it my best. That's about as fast as I can play. And from what I can tell, the recording is played at 140 beats per minute. That's all you're gonna get out of me today, I'm afraid. Back to you. I hope she'll forgive me. It took a hell of a lot of work to convince the guitar correspondent to come back after that last Fleetwood Mac episode. I quit. And it's intensely rhythmic. Both players are playing these ghost notes, which are when you're only partially hitting the drums or only partially plucking a string, so that in the case of the bass, rather than a note ringing out, it makes more of like a sound. Da da and da doo doo and da 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 and da doo 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 doo. It allows the bass to be more than just a melodic instrument, but also a percussive instrument. And in the drums, those ghost notes really drive the song along and fill the gaps. I mean, it's just crazy. This track is just insane. And then that's joined with these flamboyantly collaborative, communally sung vocal parts and lyrics. Like, isn't that deliciously campy? I love this song for how eccentric it is, how camp it is, how full of life it is. I love it for the monstrous virtuosity of its musicians. Honestly, I think this may have been the first time that I heard virtuosity, true virtuosity, in popular music at a musically formative period of my life. Once I'd saved up enough money to buy a bass, actually the very green bass that the bass correspondent is playing, one of the very first tracks that I ever learned was the opening track from this record. Not long after I turned 15, my family threw a musically themed house party in which guests could get dressed up and, if they so chose, perform a song from their selected musical. Naturally, I chose this musical and I sang this here song. This is a song that uplifts hair of all different kinds.
Long, straight, curly, fuzzy, snaggy, shaggy, ratty, matty.
It's a celebration of identity, of diversity.
Oily, greasy, fleecy, shiny, gleaming, steaming, waxing, waxing.
Flying your freak flag. Of affirming the magical joy of being alive. And I had been encouraged to
blow it, show it,
and also
let it fly in the breeze and get caught in the trees.
So for once, I let my hair out of its braids, out of its shackles. I threw my head back. I threw all caution to that breeze. And I roared this anthem to a room full of family and friends. Perhaps for the first time ever in my life, I didn't care if my hair was too fluffy, or too frizzy, or too fuzzy. I didn't even care if I looked silly. This song not only gave me license to let loose, figuratively and literally, it also gave me permission to like this crowning glory, to look at it in all its wildness and revel in the beauty, the smother, the wonder of my hair. That's it from me. If you enjoyed today's episode or you would like to support any of the weird things I do, I'll leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you are most welcome to make a donation, but no pressure, friends. Thank you so very much to everybody who has made a donation or signed up as a member. I really appreciate you, and you keep the show going, honestly. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, I will leave a link in the description to that as well. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend!
With hair, long beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxing, waxing. Get me down to there, hair, shoulder length or longer. Here, baby, there, mama, everywhere, daddy, daddy. Hair, blow it, show it, long as God can grow it. My hair, blow it, show it, long as God can grow it. My hair. Show it long as God can grow my hair.
I literally just played it perfectly at this speed. Why can't I do it now? Shake 'em out, shake 'em out. Ah, that was so close. No.